Problems encountered, mistakes made, suggestions, opinions, and step-by-step how-to. By Mike Thaman. The material I use for DrinkCoasters is 1/4 inch or 3/16 inch quarter sawn red oak. The reason I use quarter sawn is I have found it will stay flatter over a period of time. Here are 3 recent examples of coasters I have done. Feel free to customize with your own designs, but this is what I have settled on after almost 5 years. I start with a capital letter in the Dubai font and then do the name in a stick font. I'm currently using CamBam Stick 3 for these. These are free Windows fonts that you can find online. Here are a few more that I have done with last names using non-bold or narrow capitals and various length names. These did not scribe the pockets to make them stand out with more contrast. That will be shown last. Here's one that I did for all the board members of the local Christian radio station less than a half-mile from my home. Here's the backside of all the coasters that I make. To pocket out the capital letters, I use an 1/8 inch downcut flat bottom bit like the one at the left. To engrave the letters and outlines, I use one of these bits. The first one is a very cheap 10-degree or 0.01 inch tip engraver. The second is a little more expensive 20-degree engraver. The third one is a 1/32 inch flat bottom downcut bit. Left to right, cheapest to most expensive, but all will get similar results. I like the grain and hardness of oak for this project. It gives you a wood that doesn't fuzz so much that you have to spend much time doing cleanup, even if you don't use a downcut bit. Grain is visible, but unless you are doing more detail than I am in these coasters, it's not objectionable. If you decide to go with a wood with less pronounced grain, like aspen, poplar, or basswood, you'll have to fight the natural fuzz that results from the softness of the wood. Plus, I find these woods are really hard to find in quarter sawn. I'm using CamBam software for my CAD CAM package, but all common software can easily do this simple design. I'm using Mach 4 software to run my CNC. Those are the 2 packages that you're going to see in my screenshots for this video, but my technique should be easily adapted to other packages. I get my wood from a local sawmill, Siefkers, and I look for pieces that are at least 4 inches wide and approximately 1 inch thick. I have them mill surface both sides in their planer. That costs a little extra. Then I take the boards home and usually cut them into pieces at least 4 times what I need for one coaster, somewhere between 17 and 18 inches long. Then I resaw them and try to make sure they're at least 3/8 of an inch thick. Then I face the resawn side flat with my CNC and I'm ready to go. No matter how bad my resawing is, I usually get at least 1/4 inch thick blanks. Now let's look at the design aspects. I start with a 4 inch by 4 inch outline, then I offset that line by either a 1/4 inch or 3/10 of an inch from the outside to get the rough outline of my coaster art. Then I round the corners by either a 1/4 inch or 3/8 of an inch, whichever you prefer. That keeps it centered. Mark the center point with a pointless mark right now for future alignment. This is a capital C in the Dubai font. CamBam says this is 4 high, even though it is not 4 inches high. Same capital C in the same font, only boldface. Notice the lines are even less parallel than before. I only mention this to show you some of the options you have. Here I increase the letter size by 115%. CamBam calls this out at 4.6 instead of the 4.0 previously. You will have to recenter the letter after this. Make sure you are saving your work as you proceed through each step. If you're really new to this, you may want to create a series of files so that you don't have to start from scratch if something goes really wrong. This is experience speaking. Next, we can insert the text we are going to engrave. You will see why I do this next in a moment. We'll use 2 names in this video, Carl and Carlton, to show you a short and a long name. You can see here that the same font and size must be adjusted for the name's length. 2 adjustments can be made: height and character spacing. Here the short name can be enlarged to a better view on the coaster. You can try heights from 3/8 of an inch to 3/4 of an inch in height. Here it is at 5/8 of an inch. Here the character spacing was left at 1.0. Here the longer name can be shortened to a better view on the coaster. Here the height is 1/2 inch and the character spacing was changed to 0.9. Now I will explain why I waited till now to make the border for the name itself. Here I built a rectangle around the name Carl and centered it. Now you can see why that centering mark was so important early in the design. As you add, move, or change the size of items, it gives you a reference to move them back to. One critical concern is getting engraving too close to either the pocketed capital or to other engraving that you chip out the grain. Only bad experience can teach you how close is too close. That is why you must be careful even as you change the character spacing, but especially the position of the capital pocket. Here I build an offset around the box bordering the name by 0.05 inch. I found that to be a good spacing between where the engraving bit cuts and the edge of the pocket needed for the capital, at least with oak. I used that new outer box to cut the capital letter C at every intersection. Then you can delete the rest of that outer box and the lines of the C inside the box. And you can add the remnants of the outer box and join them into the capital C lines left over after those deletions. Make sure when you're done joining those parts of the C that they become closed polylines and are not left open, or you'll have trouble pocketing them. Here is the longer name with the same procedures applied. With these spacings, you will not have any chip out caused by being too close between the pocket and your engraving. That is the end of the design phase. There is so much here that you can change to your personal liking and preference. This is what I have come to after about 5 years of tweaking. Feel free to express yourself and meet your particular customer's desires. Found that these coasters compete quite well against similar coasters made using laser CNCs. Similar but still different and completely functional. Planning the cuts. The only reason I would etch the outline is if I was cutting several coasters on the same longer board. Then I would space each coaster far enough apart to be able to separate them with a saw when done. I use a bandsaw, so a 32nd of an inch is enough of a gap. Test your saw first. First, cut the pocket of the capital letter. I use an 1/8 inch flat bottom downcut bit. This cuts cleanly around the margins so they have very little or no cleanup. I use a speed of about 30% and an overlap between 0.2, that is 20%, and 0.4. The smaller overlap produces the smoothest bottom. I cut to a depth of about 35 thousandths in either 1 or 2 cuts. Here are the tool paths with a 0.2 or 20% overlap. And here are the tool paths with a 0.4 or 40% overlap. Then switch over to one of the engraving bits shown at the beginning of this video and engrave these lines 35 thousandths deep in either 1 or 2 or even 3 passes depending on your speed. To enhance the contrast on the capital letter, I sometimes etch those smooth areas. I pocket by using the same sharp bit that I engraved with. The reason that I decided on this tweak is that with only 35 thousandths of a deep pocket, the edges alone do not provide enough contrast with stain. By scoring the smooth bottom of the capital pocket areas, it gives the stain somewhere else to provide a little more contrast. There are 2 contrasts that are on the opposite ends of that spectrum. Here's how I do that. I do not change the engraving bit, but I go back and pocket the areas I pocketed before. But I tell the software that I'm using a 3/16 diameter bit. That changes the toolpath spacing without actually having to change the width of the cut or the bit. Here's what that toolpath would look like using a 0.4 or 40% overlap. Here are those tool paths using 3 different offsets to show the 3 different scoring paths used to gain stain contrast. I set the depth of this process to be 10 or 15 thousandths deeper than the pocket was cut with the 1/8 inch bit. So your new depth will be 45 thousandths to 50 thousandths deep if you pocketed to 35 thousandths originally with 1/8 inch bit. You can do this in one pass. Of course, if you set your offset too low, the path and your actual diameter of your engraving bit will get too close to cleanly score. That is what actually happened here. This process will produce some fuzz, maybe for the first time on a coaster. Cutting. I intentionally did not make a video of the actual run of making a drink coaster for one main reason. There's not much to see. My CNC head is quite large because it can take a 3.5 horsepower router for surfacing with a 1/2-inch collet, which blocks much of the camera's view in a video. This, combined with the short bits used for the coasters, make it less than impressive video. Here's a short old video clip to show you that problem. I do want to show you one thing if you're new to stick fonts that you might not be aware of. Most of them involve a double cut. It's almost as if they're pocketing or profiling that single line up and down both sides. I have found that you may have to reinvent the wheel to fix this problem. It seems that most stick fonts, including the CamBam fonts, including the toolpath retracing the line or arc in a letter as if it was making an inside profile of the stick letter. After years of using them, I found it was not worth the effort to try to circumvent this, and I just live with it. I used to spend time eliminating overlaps and a few duplicates as well, but it really wasn't worth it. Unless you're doing a great deal of stick font work, you're just as well off to just live with a little bit of extra time involved and go with the flow. The alternative is to write your own CNC font from scratch, also something I determined I wasn't worth my time. I only include this here for those that have never used these engraving fonts before. You may have not been able to see it in that video, but there is another consideration: velocity mode. Normally you wouldn't even notice because even with multiple passes your CNC will track over the letter perfectly. But if for whatever reason you decide your stick fonts to be starting and stopping very precisely, you need to pay attention to your CAD/CAM velocity settings. At the bottom of the screen are the CamBam's options. The default seems to be constant velocity. Here it is in the middle of the M, and in the K path movements, and in the E path movements. I've never had a reason with the DrinkCoasters to dial in exact stop mode, and most of your customers will not care if their customized names have extremely sharp corners or mildly rounded edges. Of course, if you change the speed, this will change the radius of the curve in constant velocity mode. Personally, I don't find this something to even worry about, but you'll have to make that call. One thing you'll not want to do is change the speed between passes. And lastly, your letters are so small that the actual time spent engraving them is a minor concern, regardless of the choices you make. Short comments on finishing. Finishing is pretty straightforward. I use my favorite gel stain, brush it in all the engraving and pocket areas with a stiff acid brush. They are called that because they were originally designed to brush in flux acid for soldering. Let it sit for a few minutes, wipe it off with a lint-free rag, and then I blow the excess out of all the recesses with an air hose. Then I wipe it down one more time. Let it dry to the touch and spray it with 3 coats of your favorite top coat. One word of caution: regardless of the top coat you use, be sure the first coat is light. If there is any excess stain down in the engravings, it may dilute it out into a heavy first coat. Also, if you use water-based polyurethane, you may raise the grain if you put too heavy of a first coat on. Brush it on. I do it if I'm only doing 1 or 2 coasters, but I usually spray a diluted 50% water-based clear matte polyurethane on. On a warm, dry day, 15 minutes will dry the first coat. I spray 2 additional coats on about 30 minutes apart. I usually let a coaster cure at least 2 days before giving them to someone to actually use. And as always, if I can answer any of your questions or be in any other help on a project like this, be glad to share my experiences, both good and bad, with you. The end. Thank you for watching.